it's Jessie from b.a.r.e Flower Farm. It is now mid-February. We are after Valentine's Day, and I thought I would give you all an update on my winter tulip forcing program. So I force hydroponically throughout the entire season, and I was able to learn how to do this through the Tulip Workshop. This time of year, there are now more uncontrollable variables that make it more difficult to force. So I wanted to talk about this high level so that you guys could get an understanding of why you might want to actually pay for education for something like the Tulip Workshop if this is something that you're interested in doing on a bigger scale or throughout the whole winter season. So this is not a paid promotion from the Tulip Workshop. One of the things that I see is that obviously a lot of people are experimenting, they're trying it on their own, which makes total sense because the workshop is definitely an investment, but things start going wrong, especially now. So it's linked to humidity, it's linked to the swings in temperature. You can see there's snow all around me. We are in mid-February and we got a lot more snow this week than we had basically all of last year, which was none. And that makes for two very, very different growing seasons. But this is a bit of pulling behind the curtains and showing you a bit of the reality behind winter forcing in case if this is something that you seriously want to consider doing. This is my rooting rack. So we've got 12 trays here. Not all of the trays are maximized. In this tray, we've got a few different varieties. So the tray's not maximized, but each one typically can hold 100. Now, the main difference with these bulbs versus earlier in the season is that they are more susceptible to disease and to mold. So technically it's a penicillium. So the blue mold over here is penicillium, and the Tulip Workshop does talk about how you can combat that and still get a crop out of it. But typically it is very precarious for people to force this time of year because it is very difficult to hold bulbs to a state where it becomes, or it's healthy enough for you to force. And what you can already see is that in this tray, we've got some tip growth, but there are some bulbs where either there is starting to be some tip growth or there just isn't. So what that means is that attrition this time of year gets a lot higher, right? So that is correlated with how well you are able to hold those bulbs. But for the most part, I am pretty happy with how this looks. So some of these are ready to be moved into the grow room, and some of them definitely still need some extra time, but typically you want to definitely see shoots coming out because that is a sign that the bulb is still alive. Now, one thing I do want to call to attention is this tray over here. So I had bought these all unchilled and I was trying to chill them on my own. You know, like I usually buy 5C bulbs from Little Farmhouse Flowers, who is one of the instructors of the Tulip Workshop, but I wanted to test out a lot more parrots, and she only had a couple of parrots. So I bought some from Netherland Bulb Company, which is a very reputable bulb company. They're great. And I did not hold all of the bulbs successfully in my refrigerator. And you can see that some of these have just been chilling out and there is no growth at all. So the ones with the tip growth tell me that the bulb is still viable. The ones that have no growth and no root growth over here, you can see the middle one, that one is pretty much a goner at this point. Luckily, this tray over here, DJ Parrot, I did get these from Netherland Bulb Co., even though Little Farmhouse Flowers had these, and they look fine. So I think that some of it is actually just the bulb itself. These came probably in a much better and healthier state than these bulbs did. So they had the same exact refrigerator that they sat in, and these overall just have less attrition in terms of right now seeing how many shoots are coming up. So here is the grow space now. We brought in 3 trays from the rooting rack before, but this is where everything looks right now. I'm going to be able to get these next week for my CSA customers. I mean, I'm at a point now where I'm scrambling for stems. So luckily I kept some from the last succession for this week's CSA members, as well as for some wholesale orders. I've also got some daffodils coming in. So this is Sir Winston Churchill. It's a smaller type of daffodil that's a double. So I'm going to be putting these in some of the bouquets. But again, You know, we've got less growing than during Valentine's Day, but still quite a bit coming in. So one thing I want to talk about is stem topple, and I wanted to use this as an example because this is not stem topple. This is just tulips leaning. So if you've grown any specialty tulips, you'll know that once they get to a certain height, especially if they're a really heavy double head, they will start leaning or even drooping in the later phases of their life. So this is very natural. This is totally fine. Stem topple is when a part over here snaps and it literally topples over. And the problem with stem topple is that you often don't know it's happening until after it makes its way into your customer's vase. Like it happens a couple of days after. I had a little bit of stem topple on my apricot parrot, but for the most part, luckily, I haven't had it yet. There's also something else called leaf topple, where the leaf starts transpiring, and just because you have leaf topple doesn't mean that it's a non-sellable stem, but it definitely poses an issue. One of the hardest things to do in the beginning is time your blooms for Valentine's Day, and this is a great opportunity to remind everyone that people want flowers even outside of Valentine's Day. So we've got some wholesale orders going out today. There's some going out this upcoming Monday, and then we've got a fundraiser for the town firehouse on Saturday. So stems are needed every day, and don't fret if your timing is off. Let's talk a bit more in detail about just why this time of year becomes more risky for hydroponically forcing winter tulips. But before I get into that, I want to talk about why I'm making this video. So the first thing is that I would love to see more local flowers, especially this time of year in the winter where there's just such low supply of winter flowers. Valentine's Day is one of the major flower holidays. Most people miss out on it. Obviously, forcing things like winter tulips can help you hit that holiday. I also firmly believe that it makes a lot of business sense to do it. So we are in mid-February right now, and I would say that I am at half of the sales that I did in 2023 in 1.5 months. And while I peaked or maxed out my potential for Valentine's Day, I certainly have not peaked and maximized my potential around Valentine's Day. I find that tulips sell themselves, at least for retail customers. People are just looking for that bright pop of color during this time of year when it is so gray and dreary outside. I mean, we had like 13 days of no sun, and people loved seeing the tulips on their tables. So there's a lot less resistance to pushing the product, as well as commanding a higher premium for that, right? So makes business sense. Would love to see more local flowers. Now, here's the other thing. Because forcing winter tulips is getting a little bit more popular, I am seeing more people do it. There are definitely more people in the Tulip Workshop, which is awesome. They've invested that time and money into taking the class so that they know how to maximize their chances of success. But I'm also seeing people just try to experiment and wing it, hoping that just buying a couple of crates and experimenting with it, they can figure out how to do it. And so this video is kind of more for you guys out there. So I always say, if you're gonna do a couple thousand, like 3,000 tulips, you're gonna try to force them, just take the course, because your risk for failure is actually quite high, and the amount of money that you could have invested in a Tulip Workshop, you would have made back if that is the amount that you're doing. Now, if you're gonna force like a couple hundred, that's a different story, because you're probably not gonna be able to make back the cost of the workshop for a few years, right? So a couple thousand is that minimum threshold for considering the Tulip Workshop. Now, here's the thing. When people are experimenting, what ends up happening is they may not realize that their stems may have something like stem topple, because they didn't understand that they had a control for the humidity. So what that means is that we are having compromised, lesser quality tulips end up in vases of customers' houses or even designers' hands, and they now have a tainted perception of winter tulips. So this is no different than a newer flower farmer coming into the neighborhood or town and selling their flowers to a local florist or someone else who buys flowers, and really giving local flowers this bad reputation of being lower quality when it really should be high quality. So winter tulips, when grown right, look fantastic. They can have a fantastic vase life. Designers would love working with them. So I also want to see the quality of winter tulips going out there being the best quality that it can be, so that those of us who are serious about growing it don't have to fight against that perception. Luckily, I'm not seeing too much of that, but I am seeing bits of that here and there on the Facebook groups. So with that all being said, I think that the two things that most people may not realize when they're experimenting is that controlling for temperature and humidity are really, really key to maximizing your success throughout the entire season. And here's the thing, if you're just forcing a tray or two and you have success, I'll go as far to say that that success may be very difficult for you to replicate later on. So in other words, it is technically not a success for your season. And I say this because I have had in my first year the education, the knowledge of the Tulip Workshop, and yet I had trays that completely failed later in the season. So there's a bit of the experience as well as the education piece of it. But again, like, I want to help flower farmers who are serious about this, doing this in high quantities, avoid the heartache of having entire trays or crates fail because they didn't understand the variables that they had to control. I think a really good example is this year. In the beginning of January, we had a lot of rain. I would say that in the Northeast this time of year, we typically would have snow, but instead, because we had rain, there was higher humidity. A lot of us are growing in our basements. So we had standing water in our basements. The instructor of the Tulip Workshop, Linda, also had standing water in her basement. Standing water equals to humidity. So if you don't know how to control for that humidity and you don't know what your humidity should be at, those are red flags, because that is going to lead to things like stem topple. So we talk a lot about that in the Facebook groups. There are people who receive the education and yet still have those trays of failures. And I think one of the benefits of being in a private Facebook group where you've invested that money and time is that people are trying to troubleshoot for each other. So someone might say, hey, my entire tray of Delta Storm had stem topple. Is anyone else seeing this? We share what varieties might be more prone to things like stem topple than other varieties, because there are times where you see a grower grow two very different varieties, but same growing conditions, and one variety has issues, but the other hasn't. Sometimes you see those issues being prevalent amongst many growers, and now we can isolate that, hey, that is a little bit more varietal. Even though other people may have had success, there is less wiggle room or there is less tolerance for fluctuations. And that is really important for us, because that means if you have not had control over your environment and knowing how to control it, then that might be a variety that you want to avoid in the future. We tend to think of climate change as only impacting us growing outside, but climate change also impacts indoor growing, because ultimately the humidity and the temperatures are going to fluctuate. So the more knowledge you have around what that means for you and what you need to do, the better you are off enforcing. So all of that being said, I am not over the hump right now. I've luckily to date have had basically all of my trays be successful, but now we are entering into the most precarious time, again, because it is difficult to hold bulbs and basically succession plant. Your bulbs are going to degrade. Your bulbs might get mold. Your bulbs might also be taken over by fusarium. You'll know if the bulb has fusarium when it is very lightweight or it actually starts disintegrating into a powder. Fusarium will basically eat away at the starches, and that's why the bulb becomes powdery or light. So if you have a light bulb, just throw it away. If you have a toasted marshmallow type of bulb, but it has some weight, there is hope. So again, a lot of this is experience. I had some bulbs where I think they froze, unfroze in the refrigerator. And I am now trying to figure out if they have any viability, which will inform me next year if it's even worth rooting them. It is a learning journey. Every single year we learn a little bit more, especially because the conditions change. But I definitely want to incorporate more bulb forcing next year, whether that looks like tulips or daffodils. I started trialing some hydroponic daffodils this year, which was awesome. And next year, I definitely want to source more pre-chilled daffodils. So I think that there's so much opportunity for winter growing despite all of the risks. There's risks growing throughout the entire time of year. But what I love is just from a business perspective, there are less barriers on the selling front. So if you can figure out the growing front, then it's a lot easier on the selling side. And I think that's where a lot of beginner flower farmers struggle, is that they figure out the growing part, but then the selling part is so difficult. And in this case, it's a little bit flipped around because the tulips will sell themselves. So hopefully this video was helpful for anyone who is considering forcing, or people who are in that latter camp of already experimenting and on the line of whether or not they want to join the Tulip Workshop. Again, I am not being paid to say any of this, but I hope that this video is helpful and informative for you. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below. If you look behind me, we've got a lot of winter tulips heading over to our local fire station for a fundraiser tomorrow. So I will put up some shorts videos on me making my CSA bouquets, as well as those just for fun in case if you are interested.